And now we can get started. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is my talk about cookieplone, which is a new opinionated Plone installer that we created this year. And I'm going to explain how it works, why we decided to do some things the way we did, and then a little bit of the roadmap for what might happen next with it. I'm David Glick. I've been part of the Plone community for about 15 years. I live in Seattle, Washington, so normally today is Thanksgiving. I would be at home eating turkey, but I'm very happy to be here in Brazil instead. And I work currently with Kit Concept. Okay, so what is cookieplone? It is an opinionated Plone installer, so it's a way to get Plone ready to use with the project. I'm going to say it's an installer and a project generator, so it's not just installing some Python packages, it's also giving you all the tools you need to be productive with your site. It's implemented as a set of templates for cookiecutter, which is a Python tool for creating a template for a project. It's not just one template, it's several templates and some glue to make them work well together. So we have a backend add-on template, we have a front-end add-on template, so a Volto add-on, and then we have a template for a project that includes both a backend and a front-end and makes them work well together. And this is the way of installing Plone that we're recommending if you're using Volto 18. So you want a Volto site as opposed to a classic UI site. You want Volto 18. And you can use Volto 18 either with Plone 6.1, which is still in beta, or with Plone 6.0. Either way, you can use this template. But it has some particular features that means it doesn't work with older versions of Volto so well. So first things first, let's take a look what happens when you run it. But also I'll show you here the documentation page. So you can go to the Plone docs if you want to try it out. Look for the install Plone with cookieplone doc, and then you can walk through the same steps I'm going to do and try it yourself. Okay, so first we have to run cookieplone. You can do that either with pipx or UVX if you have UV. So you need one of these two tools just to install and run the package in a temporary environment. But you don't have to do anything else to get cookieplone. And then cookieplone itself looks like this. It has this little banner with the Plone logo, and it prompts you for what type of template you want to run, a project or backend add-on or front-end add-on. I'm going to choose the project. Next, cookieplone is going to do some sanity checks to make sure that everything is as it should be on your system. So it's checking the version of Python, the version of Node. It makes sure that you have Git installed. It checks to see if you have Docker with the version that we support. You don't actually have to have Docker to use the template. Some of the commands that it creates for you require Docker, but most of them don't. And then going along, it prompts you for a project title and description. The slug, which is what it's going to name the repository, essentially. The project URL is where you're going to deploy this thing in the end. Maybe you don't know, that's fine. But if you put this in, then you'll get everything you need to deploy there in the end. Put in the author name and email. Should we use pre-release versions is basically, do you want to have beta versions of Plone or not? So whether you choose this or not, it'll look for what the latest version of Plone is. But if you choose pre-release versions, it will include the betas. So I chose that here. And then it found Plone 6.1.0 beta 1 and is using that. It also found Volto 18.1.1 as the latest version, at least when I was preparing the slides. And then it suggested a Python package name and a Volto add-on name, both based on the project title that I put in earlier. Sorry about the size of the text. You can go find it on the docs and run through it yourself, and I'm explaining the different pieces. So, going on, it has more questions for you. What language do you want to use in your site? What's your GitHub username, which is related to some of the CI automation that it'll set up for you. Where do you want to put your Docker images if you build Docker images? So you can choose the GitHub Container Registry or Docker Hub or GitLab. And then options for several of the pieces related to deployment, whether or not you want to include them. So you can include Varnish as a caching server or not. You can include Ansible to set up a VM to do deployments to or not. And you can set up GitHub Action to do that deployment or not. So a lot of questions, but nothing terribly, it's not the end of the world if you choose the wrong thing. You can just cancel and create your project again. So after this interview, then it tells you a little summary of what it's going to do. It shows the progress as it's doing the different pieces. And in the end, it creates a new directory that has a Git repository that has a number of things in it. So what do you get? You get a backend. The backend folder, it has the basic structure for a Python package for a normal Plone backend add-on. It gives you a makefile with some commands to use with your backend. So command to install, a command to create an empty Plone site, a command to start it, and a command to test it. It gives you a Docker file to build a Docker image, and that'll include both the standard Plone installation in a Docker image, but also if you include any other add-ons, those would get included in this custom Docker image. It includes town crier, so you've got a place to put changelog entries if you're making releases of this thing at some point. So that's the backend folder. Then we've got the front end. So we have the structure for a Volto add-on here. We have some commands, front end install, start, and test. We have a front end Docker image, which again is a custom Docker image that's extended with any add-ons you want to use. Then we have, outside of the front end and back end, we have some top level make commands that do operations on both the back end and the front end at the same time. So make install, that'll install the back end and front end. Make check is going to do linting and formatting tasks. Make i18n is going to scan through your code to find any strings that need to be translated, and it'll update the locale files. Make test runs the tests, of course, for both the back end and front end. And make clean will just wipe everything out to a clean slate so you can start from scratch if you need to. The template also includes a Docker stack. This is intended mostly for testing things locally, but with a set of Docker images that are connected to each other, somewhat similar to a production deployment. So there's a command to build images, which will build both the front end and back end images just locally. And then a bunch of stack related commands. So start the stack, create a site in the stack, check the status, stop it, remove it. And the stack in this case means a Docker Compose stack that includes a back end and front end, and I think traffic as a web server. We get the tools we need for acceptance testing with Cypress, so you can write end-to-end tests in JavaScript that are operating a real browser. So we have make acceptance images build. That'll build a slightly modified version of the images for acceptance testing. Acceptance container start will start those containers with those images. Acceptance test will actually start the test tool. And acceptance container stop, that will stop everything again. We get some GitHub action workflows, or GitLab if you choose GitLab. That might still be in progress. The GitHub Actions workflows will handle things like linting, running tests whenever you make a commit to your repository, just in case you forgot to do that locally. And then it'll also release the Docker images to the container registry that you chose. And there's a GitHub Actions workflow that you can run manually whenever you want to do the deployment to a remote server if it's been set up. And a little bit more about that deployment pipeline. This is the same sort of approach that Eriko showed in his training a few days ago. So you can also go to the Plone deployment training on the Plone training website to if you want to get more details about that. But it includes an Ansible playbook that you run just on a plain Ubuntu or Debian server that will do some basic setup, like creating a Plone user and setting up the SSH key and configuring the firewall, that sort of thing, installing Docker. The template also includes a Docker Swarm stack configuration. So that's similar to the one that's used for local testing with just a few differences. It's designed to run on the host name that you entered when you were filling out the questions at the beginning. And that includes also traffic and Varnish, if you chose Varnish. Okay, so you run the template, you get a whole bunch of things. Maybe it's more than you need, but also you don't have to use everything. Hopefully it gives you a good starting point. Now, I want to say a little bit more about why did we create a new thing and what are some of the decisions that we made in it. But first, I need to take a step back and do a history lesson, because that's what I tend to do. So I'm going to talk about what makes a good Plone installer, and also just go through some of the different installers we've had over the years and what has worked well and what hasn't. Okay, so what makes a good installer? Well, you want minimal dependencies, right? You don't want to have to install a whole bunch of other things just to run your installer. You want it to be reliable and repeatable, so you can, install on one machine and also install on another machine and get something similar that's working, even if this machine is slightly different versions of things. You want it to be portable and work on Windows, Mac, Linux as similarly as possible. You want it to be easy to use, so that somebody who doesn't really know Plone can come and, maybe the number of questions here is overwhelming, but hopefully there's at least good documentation and reasonable defaults, and we can kind of minimize the amount that you need to know to successfully get started. We want it to be batteries included, right? So we want it to have all the pieces that you need, and not have to go back and find some random add-ons and add things in with a bunch of extra steps later. And we want it to be flexible, right? We want you to be able to use this thing even if you're planning to use Plone in a number of different ways. Now, you might notice that a couple of these different goals are somewhat in tension, right? So making something easy to use and making it flexible at the same time, that's challenging, right? And so we're trying to pick the right set of things to ask, and maybe we got it right and maybe we didn't, but that's what we're trying to balance out. Just to touch on one thing again, in case it isn't already clear, why can't you just run pip install Plone the way you could with a lot of Python software? Well, you can do that. You can install Plone with pip, and we have documentation on how to do that, and it's a useful thing to know how to do if you want to do that and then do some other things a custom way. But you install install Plone with pip, and you get Plone's Python packages, but you also need scripts and configuration, custom add-ons, database, maintenance jobs, dev tools, continuous integration, DevOps. So if you just start with pip, you might spend quite some time getting things the way you want. Maybe that's the way you want to go if you want things to be a very particular way, or if you're just used to doing things a certain way, that's fine. Okay, so looking back in time to this is early 2000s, Plone 2 era. So there's no PyPI yet. Maybe there is a new thing called the cheese shop that later becomes PyPI. There's no eggs or wheels. You just have people taking their Python packages and putting them in a tarball. Maybe that tarball has a bunch of different packages. And then this was how we installed Plone. We just downloaded the tarball, unzipped it, and then could run it with Python. So it had the advantage of being pretty simple and easy to understand. The downside was that if you wanted to change the version of some particular package, there was no built-in dependency management to make sure you were installing things that were compatible, the right version of Python, and that sort of thing. So it was very much a manual sort of process. We got to Plone 3, 2007. Build out came along as this new thing, and for a while we were all figuring out how to use it, but it really solved a lot of problems. It handled dependency management. It handled there was a configuration file where you could set up not just installing your Python packages, but creating scripts and running other recipes that could set up the things you needed. And build out, I would say, has served us pretty well over the years. It's been a bit of a learning curve, and it's not a tool that's commonly used in the rest of the Python community. Those are some of its downsides, but it's been something that we figured out how to use productively and was able to run in a lot of different situations. One of the other things that was a challenge with build out was the reliability and portability aspect of it, because you would run build out on your machine locally to set up Plone there, and then if you wanted to do a deployment, you also had to run build out there. And if the deployment environment was different from your local machine, you could run into problems, or if the package index was down temporarily, then you would run into a network issue. So there was no like build your system over here and then deploy that artifact over here, which is kind of the ideal situation you want for a deployment. Sort of in the same era as build out, which I would say the era of build out is from back then until now. There are still people using it. But we had a thing called the unified installer. And along with that, I'm going to put the Windows installer, which was a different thing for Windows, but kind of in a similar category. These were installers that were really designed for the ease of use and getting people started who didn't know Plone and didn't know build out. And it was kind of a clever idea. It really was a wrapper around build out. So it would download, or it included a copy of all the packages that you needed for Plone, and it included a build out configuration. And it would basically do some checks to make sure that you had what you need for dependencies, and then it would run build out to set that up. At least if I'm remembering correctly how it worked. We also, I'm not sure exactly when this came along, but we have Plone CLI and Bob templates, which is a little bit more in the category of a project skeleton generator. You run it and you get your project a little bit more like cookiecutter and cookieplone. I won't say a lot evaluating these because I haven't used them as much myself, but one thing that was cool about Bob templates was it was not just useful for starting your project, but it also had commands for adding pieces of code into your project later. Like if you want to generate a content type and add it to your existing project, or generate a behavior or a view or something like that. Moving a little bit closer to the modern age, I think it was maybe Plone 5 where we got the ability to install Plone with pip. Is that around the right time? Maybe earlier. Sometime in the past decade, it became possible. And like I said, this is a more bare bones installation. It's not giving you an entire project, but it is a building block that we've been using for some of the more recent ways of installing Plone instead of using build out. And it has the advantage of being more standard with the way the rest of the Python world works. We also have Docker, which is nice for reliability and portability, right? This is the one where you can build your system on one machine and deploy it somewhere else, and with a few exceptions, you can rely on the environment sort of working the same. This isn't necessarily so useful for development use cases because you get an image that's built, and if you want to change anything inside, you have to like exec into the container and run commands there. And there are ways that we could make that work better for development, but it's not really something that we've gone into as a community to make it work really well yet. With Plone 6 and Volto, we had cookiecutter Plone starter, which was what we had documented as the right way to get started if you wanted Plone 6 with Volto. And so this was a cookiecutter template. It's actually somewhat similar to cookieplone, and I'll explain why we have two things in a little bit. It would give you a Plone backend package. It would also run a separate generator that was part of Volto to create a front end. And it would give you those if you wanted to create a project. It was not so useful if you wanted to create an add-on because at that time, add-ons were structured a little bit differently than projects in Volto, which is one of the things that we've tried to change for Plone 6.1. And then we have sort of this year, Plone 6.1, Volto 18, and we have cookieplone. So look back to May. I'm in Mexico City at a very nice sprint organized by Dante and Gil and Adriana. And I went there thinking, I want to do some work on cookiecutter Plone starter. There's some bugs that I'd like to fix, update some best practices that were doing things a slightly older way. There was this dependency problem where the generator that we were using in Volto was used, it was built using Yeoman, which nobody was really maintaining for newer versions of Node anymore. So that was something we needed to figure out. And then I saw an opportunity, we saw an opportunity to not just have one template that gave you front end and back end, but to be a little bit more flexible and have several different templates so you can create just the back end if you want it, or just the front end if you want it, or something that has both of them together. And this guy, I think you might know him, was also at the sprint, and he convinced me that actually we couldn't just do this by fixing cookiecutter Plone starter. And Eriko is one of the maintainers of cookiecutter, so I listened to him on such things. And I think the big reason for that was this desire to have several different templates that work well together. And he saw this, that would require creating a new package that could sort of access all those templates and run some of those templates within the other one. So that was sort of the inspiration for cookieplone. And we worked on making it happen that week in Mexico City. So what is different with cookieplone compared to cookiecutter Plone starter? It's set up to create a monorepo. At least if you choose the project template, it's going to create both a front end package and a back end package in the same repository. And specifically, it'll do that whether you're creating an add-on or creating a project. So this is kind of nice in the Volto world. If you want to create an add-on, you often need both a Node.js package for Volto and a Python package for Plone. And now you can run the template and get both of them together, and you can make a commit that includes updates to both of them, and you don't have to like deal with two different repositories, including the right commits from each one in your project. We also now use PNPM workspaces for the front end. This is part of some of the new structure of how Volto projects work in Volto 18. Why does that matter? It's nice if you want to work on your project and also include a development version of an add-on, and particularly a development version of Volto itself. Like if you need to check out Volto in order to work on fixing a bug and you want to test everything together. Using PNPM workspaces solves a lot of problems in how the dependencies get resolved and where they get installed so that you don't have multiple copies of the same package that are causing problems. And then on the Python backend side, one significant improvement we made was before you could only create a package that had one namespace, like collective.something. But in our community, we commonly want packages that have no namespace or more than one namespace. And now that works just fine. The rest of my slides are sort of scattershot Q&A, so I'll go through bit by bit. How does cookiecutter, or how does cookieplone work? It's a wrapper around cookiecutter, so mostly it's just running cookiecutter. But like I said, there's these different templates. So it runs the project template, it runs the backend template, it runs the front end template. They each add their own things to the folder. And then it does some actions at the end, things like overriding some files to make the backend and the front end work well together if you're building a project, or deleting some files that aren't relevant if you chose to not include one of the features. It also has some custom filters. So the way cookiecutter works is you set up a list of prompts, which are the questions it's going to ask at the beginning. And you can set up defaults, and you can write custom code that will calculate what those defaults are. That's how we do things like looking at what's the current version of Volto. And because we have multiple templates, just because of a detail of how cookiecutter works, we would have had to copy that code between the different templates. But because we created this new package, cookieplone, we could just have one copy of these filters in cookieplone, and then all the templates can import it from there. Yeah, and I already talked about the subtemplates. I'm guessing that some people are looking at this and saying, well, okay, that looks cool, but what if I prefer build out? What if I don't want Volto? What if I use unit test instead of PyTest? What if I use a different deployment solution instead of Docker Swarm? These are legitimate questions, and I said it's an opinionated installer, and it is. So part of the answer is just we made some decisions based on what we think will work in a lot of cases, and if you don't like it, you don't like it. But I think we should talk about it because the goal is for this to be useful to a large portion of the community and to have the defaults that make the sense for the most people. So if it's a case where half the community wants one thing and half the community wants another thing, there's ways that we can deal with that, right? We can have an option that you choose from a question when you're getting started, or we can have another template that we add. Maybe there's a classic UI project template versus that uses build out versus a Volto template that uses what we currently have. And then there's probably also situations where, you know, for your company, you have your own requirements and it's not something necessarily that the rest of the community needs. In that case, you can still take the cookieplone templates repository, fork it, make your changes there, and then you can use those templates instead of the default ones. And that relates closely to this slide, which is how do you contribute to cookieplone? I've sort of explained there's two different repositories. There's cookieplone itself, which is the command that you run and some utility functions. And then there's cookieplone templates, which has the templates in it. So if you want to fork the thing, or if you want to contribute, clone cookieplone templates, and then run cookieplone like this. So the UVX cookieplone or pipx run cookieplone, that part's the same as before. But we're setting an environment variable with the path to cookieplone templates where we cloned it, and then we'll use the copy that you have on your local disk instead of it getting fetched from GitHub like would happen by default. I wanted to make the point that it's expected that the templates will evolve over time. We're never going to get everything right. We're always fixing bugs or finding things that we can make work a little bit smoother. Meanwhile, of course, you're running the template at one stage in your project, right? And then you're going on working and maybe some improvements are happening to the templates later. So what do you do then? I mean, I think we need to figure this out a little bit, but I would say don't panic. And I think this approach can work. If you've started a project and then it's a year later and something significant has changed in the template that you kind of want, you can run the template again, create a new project, and then copy in the parts that you need from your existing project, you know, all your custom code. And maybe that sounds tricky, but we've done it in a few cases and it hasn't seemed too bad so far in practice. And then at the end here, I have a few slides about the roadmap. We've got some features that are in progress. The support for Bob templates actually just got merged within the past couple of days. So now you can generate a project with cookieplone and you can still go in and run. We have a make command that wraps Plone CLI. So if you run make add content type or one of the other things that you can add with Bob templates, it supports that. And then there's a PR in progress from Mikkel for improving the support for GitLab. And I've been putting off reviewing that one because I don't have a copy of GitLab, but we can talk about it. I think it's a good improvement to have. And then this list is just some ideas that aren't actually in progress yet, but I think we might want to work on at some point. So I know I've talked with Steve Piercy about creating a template for setting up documentation for a project. So I think this could be another sub-template that you can choose to add to your project. It would come with the Plone Sphinx theme and the basic boilerplate that you need so you can just start writing Markdown right away. Currently, we have the DevOps pipeline, but I'm certain it's not the way that everybody wants to do DevOps. So just to do some refactoring to turn that into a separate sub-template, then at some point we could have you pick, do you want the Docker Swarm deployment or do you want the Kubernetes deployment or do you want something else? Moritz opened a ticket for having an option to create a Plone distribution. So that's just some additional files that get created in your backend package to define a Plone distribution and create the folder where you can set it up. There's a newer tool in the Python world for managing development of a Python package and setting up your environments for working on it. It's called Hatch. It looks pretty interesting. We'd have to look at what all the changes are that are needed, but potentially we could choose to use it for Plone backends if we want to. And then at some point, I would love to make it so that you can use cookieplone through a web-based UI or within a GitHub code space. And the goal here would be to just make it that much easier to get started so you don't even have to figure out pipx, UV, the things that you have to install Python before you can run cookieplone. And I think we even can make it so that we have a Docker image set up within that you can use within GitHub code space. So you create your project and then you create a code space so you can just start working there. If it's a sprint day and you can't be bothered to like install anything on your local computer, or you're somewhere where the network is slow, imagine that. Finally, I wanted to say thanks to the list of people who have contributed. It's not just a few people by now. There's other people contributing. And if you have something that doesn't seem right in cookieplone, please feel free to file an issue and we'll try to take a look at it. So thank you. That's cookieplone. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone. Right here.
Thank you, David. Just one thing, you asked if someone asks, what if I don't use Volto? Well, we have just created a project that is classic with cookieplone, and you just ignore the front-end folder and you're done.
Yeah, if you've got a classic UI project, you have a few options. I think we could probably make it work even better than it does, yeah, but you can create the full template for a project and then just delete the front end and not use the commands that use the front end. You can also use the backend add-on template that creates, it doesn't have all the things, it doesn't have the deployment pipeline and stuff, but it has a lot of what you would want.
We created the project with the project template, and we just use the make file inside the backend folder, and yeah.
Yeah, and I think if we took a close look and figured out like what do we want to be different from either the project or the backend add-on, and to really have it be a nice classic UI project, I don't think it would be a ton of work to create that as a separate template if we want to.
So anyone have another question? No, so thank you again, David. Thanks, everyone. Another round of applause for David, please.